Recovered file report or document number MHCRX013 or Jacques Giras. Classification Level 2 Observational. Restricted internal review. Compiled by Nora Finch, Data Analyst, Marine Phenomena Archives, Helsinki. The following is a partial reconstruction of the home logs, a series of unsent journal entries, personal correspondences, and voice-to-text files extracted from the defunct Osthollow Marine Research Outpost. All material is attributed to Dr. Ezra Holm, former evolutionary biologist, presumed deceased. Recovered media was located in a corrupted RAID storage device during routine data salvage on August the 12th, 2037, nearly 5 years after the outpost was officially decommissioned, following a series of unexplained equipment failures and personnel disappearances. The contents of the logs have been subject to considerable debate within the scientific community, primarily due to their mixture of empirical observation, speculative theory, and subjective experience. Dr. Holmes documented deterioration in tone and cognition over the course of the entries has led some to dismiss the material as a psychological breakdown triggered by prolonged isolation and ecological stress. Nonetheless, multiple climatological and biological anomalies described within the logs have since been independently corroborated through unrelated field reports, including mutations in coastal vertebrate locomotion patterns, parallel behavioral shifts in invertebrate migration, spontaneous mollusk die-offs in oxygen-stable marine zones, audio telemetry files containing non-random pattern clicking across disparate ecosystems. Despite this, no formal institution has recognized the carcinization convergence hypothesis presented in Holmes' notes as a valid or testable theory. It is included here as a matter of archival record only. Note: one of our interns noticed a recurring line in the corrupted metadata string at the end of each file. It was dismissed as machine noise, but I include it here for completeness. The shape was always there. We only learned to see it too late. Readers are advised to interpret the following entries with caution. We are not responsible for conclusions drawn. And if I wasn't always alone, I think it's important to remember that. There were lectures, halls full of half-asleep undergrads scribbling nonsense in the margins of their notebooks. There were research partners, assistants, even friends, if you count long, tired silences over instant coffee in a windowless lab as friendship. Before Osthollow, before the silence, I was a man with questions that made people uncomfortable. Not provocative questions, just persistent ones. Questions that lingered long after a peer review. Questions that made a grant committee frown. And one question above all that got me labeled as a crank. Why do things keep turning into crabs? It sounds absurd, doesn't it? That was the first wall I hit. The smirk before the rejection. Carcinization is one of those cute evolutionary footnotes, a biological oddity that professors toss into PowerPoint slides to make students look up from their phones. Everything wants to be a crab, we say, as if evolution is playing some grand practical joke. But I wasn't laughing, because I kept finding them. Not just crabs, but crab-like structures, flattened, armored morphologies cropping up in species that had no business with exoskeletons, fish with emerging shell folds, echinoderms with hardened joint clusters, amphibians showing pre-segmented limb rotation. The patterns weren't localized. They were global. They were timed. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Data noise, pattern seeking. But the numbers didn't lie. Over a decade of peer-reviewed records, sediment studies, and open-source biodiversity logs, they all showed the same curve. a spike in crab-like morphologies across divergent lineages, right before ecological inflection points. The Permian, the Devonian, the end Triassic, the late Cretaceous, always a bloom of the form just before mass extinction. I presented my findings in Lisbon, a quiet, humid conference room filled with people who already regretted attending the afternoon sessions. My talk was titled Convergent Evolution and Structural Recurrence in Decapoda. No one laughed. No one asked questions. That was worse. I left the conference with a box of printouts and the distinct feeling that I'd spoken aloud in a language no one wanted to understand. 6 months later, my position at the university wasn't renewed. Budget cuts, they said. But I saw the glances in the hallway. I knew what they whispered. Holmes gone sideways. Crab guy. Poor bastard. They weren't wrong. I did go sideways, straight to the edge of the continent. The Osthollow Marine Research Station was a leftover Cold War facility, half buried in the cliffs, rebuilt for scientific use but still humming with secrets. The sea here wasn't blue. It was dark, slate and silt and pressure. Nothing about it felt calm. I told myself I came here to be alone. The truth was, I came here to watch, and the crabs were waiting. I began again, slowly. No grand theory, no sweeping claims, just data. I dredged the shelf, sampled tide pools, logged anomalies in gene drift across pelagic zones, and what I found was consistent, unnervingly so. One morning, I logged a deep-sea skate embryo with lateral chitin formation. I told myself it was a deformity. Then came the salamander, gill arches hardening into what looked like fused shell bands, then the eel pouts, then the jellyfish, and then the realization. Nature wasn't repeating itself, it was defaulting. I'd always assumed evolution was a tree, branching, experimenting, reaching. But the shape that kept appearing wasn't on a branch. It was at the root, like a memory, like a reflex. And it was coming back. I should have been excited. Discovery is the lifeblood of science. But what I felt was a slow, numbing dread, like realizing the thing behind the glass isn't a reflection, but something looking back. I tried writing an article, a letter, a warning, but I couldn't find the words that didn't sound insane. The deeper I went, the more certain I became, and the harder it became to say it aloud. How do you tell people the world is returning to a shape it wore long before we stood upright? You don't. You record. You watch. You wait. And you write it down, even if no one will ever read it. No one. The first time it happened, I convinced myself it was an equipment fault. My coastal biosampler, an aging drone affectionately called Lurch, returned a sequence from the shallows with an error code I hadn't seen before. MPROTSH4D. A corrupted protein marker sequence, flagged for non-standard morphology deviation. I assumed brine contamination. Maybe a leech had latched on. I was wrong. The sample, once cleaned, revealed not contamination but consistency. The protein sequence, though flagged as malformed, matched with remarkable accuracy to an extinct shore crab species from the Pliocene. An echo, buried in a creature that should have had no such genetic structure. A filter feeder, no exoskeleton. And yet there it was. The same curvature, the same lateral symmetry. I cross-referenced every public genetic archive I could access. No matches. No history of hybridization or mimicry. The sequence shouldn't have existed. I saved it under a hidden folder. Redundancy _001. Within 2 weeks, I had 4 more. Each new sample came from different coordinates, different depths. One from a pelagic bloom off the Nova Scotia shelf. One from a freshwater feeder stream, one from a captured cephalopod, each with slight variations, but all trending in the same direction. Plates, folding, segmentation, the blueprint of a crab and everything. I didn't publish. I didn't even write it into the field reports. Something in me had already begun to shrink from exposure. This wasn't discovery anymore. It was recognition. Late at night, I'd sit in the dark lab, playback looping from surveillance cameras placed along the tidal shelf. The footage was always the same. Black water, slow foam, and occasional flashes of motion. A gull, a crab, a rockfish. But sometimes it looked wrong. Movements that started too smooth and ended too sharply. Shapes that passed too close to the lens, like they knew where it was. I told myself it was pareidolia, but I started keeping notes on the times. 3:07 a.m., 3:14, 3:19. Each incident within the same window, each with clicking. It wasn't constant, but when it came, it was rhythmic, like the lab's old radiators warming up. Click, click, click. Pause. Click. I didn't record it. Some things feel like they shouldn't be played back. Instead, I turned back to the data. Numbers made sense. Charts didn't move when you looked away. I found a correlation between anomalous behavior clusters and shallow water temperature spikes. That part I could rationalize. Thermal stress causes mutation, but the rate was too fast. Changes that should have taken generations were showing up within months. Some samples showed early-stage segmentation at embryonic levels, inherited default. I checked the lab logs, no tampering, no cross-contamination. I ran controls, re-ran them. Still the same. Eventually, I stopped sleeping altogether. The dreams, when they came, were filled with glassy eyes and tide-slick rock. Not monsters, just the feeling of observation, like something beneath the waves was watching. Not me, specifically, but everything. Patiently, like it had time. I tried to call Shale. Mariana and I hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since she changed fields. Climate microbiology. A smart move. Easier grants, less scrutiny. I still remember the last thing she said to me, though. "You're not wrong, Ezra. You're just looking too hard." I stared at her contact info for almost 10 minutes before closing the screen. What was I going to say? The crabs are in everything. The world is collapsing inward. Even I wasn't sure I believed it yet. So I kept quiet. I kept digging, and the pattern kept unfolding. It wasn't just a form repeating across species. It was something else. A trend. A pull. Something moving beneath the surface of life, dragging all of us, slowly, silently, toward the same shape, toward the same... I started wearing gloves in the lab. It wasn't protocol. There were no biohazards, but the skin on my hands had begun to dry out. It started around the knuckles, a tightness when I flexed, then a pattern of fine, pale lines radiating outward, like hairline fractures or growth rings. I told myself it was the salt air, the dry winter wind off the Atlantic, a consequence of not drinking enough water. But I drank liters a day, and still the tightness grew. The gloves weren't for protection. They were for deniability. I needed my hands to feel normal when I touched things. Needed to believe my body was still my own. At first, I thought the pain in my joints was a side effect of sleeplessness, but it came in waves, rhythmic. Aching pressure at 3:17 a.m., again at 4:04. By 5:00, it was gone. Every night, like tides. I ran blood tests. Protein levels were high, but not dangerously so. No infection. No swelling. But there were micro fractures, Fine calcified threads forming around the joint capsules, not breaking, just lining them, like insulation, like preparation. I didn't input the data into the main server. I logged it manually, on paper, tucked between pages of a shipping manifest from the previous winter. If I never submitted it, I reasoned, it wouldn't be real. I needed someone to hear it, someone who could look me in the eye and say, yes, this is happening. Or, no, you've lost your mind. So I opened the satellite relay and tried again. This time, I called Doctor Kimwell at Halifax, a neutral party. We'd worked tangentially on a joint survey project years back. Not close, but cordial. Professional. I sent him a short message. Martin. Ever seen crustacean traits and chordates under environmental stress? Rapid onset, non-adaptive. Doesn't make sense. He replied hours later. Sounds like projection, Ezra. You sure you're not just looking too hard again? That phrase again. The same one Mariana had used. Looking too hard. As though this were something that could be unseen. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned to the cameras again. I had mounted 4 on the eastern tide shelf. Infrared capable, motion tracking, deep archival buffer. They caught more than the eye did. One night, I watched a gull land on the rocks, its left wing dragging. Old injury, I thought. Common. But then it began to move. Not hop, not flutter. Sideways. 3 precise steps, each one pivoting from the torso rather than the legs. Then it stopped and looked directly at the camera. Its eyes reflected red in the infrared. Not the way bird eyes should. The footage corrupted at that point. Just static. Then a frame of something else. Not the gull, but a dark, wet surface. Possibly rock. Possibly something else. I pulled the drive and sealed it in a lead data case. I haven't watched it since. What am I chasing? What am I afraid of? It's not the shape, not the data. It's the feeling that I'm not discovering something new. I'm remembering. The patterns aren't linear. They're recursive, self-similar. Like a fractal of exoskeletal design coiling backward through time. I plotted the data on a new axis. Layered ecological collapses over radiation spikes, extinction pulses, and oceanic salinity drift. Each time the curve ends the same way. The shape returns. Not because it thrives, because it persists. I've begun to dream again, but not of water. Not anymore. Now I see cities. Familiar, but not human. Built of angles too low, passageways too narrow. Structures designed for motion that doesn't walk or run, but scuttles. The dreams don't end. I just wake up somewhere in them. Last night, I found sand in my bed. I haven't been to the beach in days. The world is going quiet. I don't mean locally. I mean systemically. The satellite uplink has gone down 4 times in the past week. No storms, no geomagnetic events. The station diagnostics say, signal lost, external error. No internal fault. No one to blame. Just quiet. I tried reaching out to field stations in the southern archipelagos. No reply. I pinged the Mainland Institute twice. Once with data, once without. Both bounced. No error. Just no receipt. Even the news feeds have grown thin. Pre-programmed weather loops. Stock footage. The same grainy B-roll of jellyfish blooms from 5 years ago. The headlines, what little remains, are passive. Marine life continues changing. Shell patterns increase. Unusual tidal stability across northern coasts. No questions, no analysis, just acceptance. I think we've stopped trying to understand, or maybe we never did. Yesterday, a school of herring washed up on the southern rock face. Normally, I'd run tissue scans, document pH levels. But when I approached them, I stopped. It wasn't the death. It was the arrangement. Their bodies weren't scattered. They were laid out, lined nose to tail in concentric arcs, like fossil ridges, as though something had moved them, or they'd moved themselves into formation. I stood over them for 20 minutes, didn't collect a single one. Instead, I found myself sketching the pattern in my notebook when I returned to the lab, not even realizing my hand was moving. I haven't done that since childhood, drawn unconsciously. When I noticed what I'd drawn, I froze. It was the same shape from my models, the same curvature, segment over segment, folding toward a central spiral, like a shell or a coil, like preparation, and my hand. It didn't hurt when I held the pen curled. That was the moment I realized I no longer needed the gloves. I took them off and placed them in the incinerator. I didn't watch them burn. That night, I reviewed the camera footage from the northern bluff. One frame, just one, contained something that wasn't supposed to be there. A figure, low to the ground, not walking, not crawling, moving sideways. It disappears before the next frame loads. The timestamp is missing. The data file is labeled unknown type. I don't remember labeling it. I don't remember sleeping either. But I woke up on the floor with salt in my mouth. The sea is louder now, not in volume, but in presence. I can feel it pressing against the station, not crashing or pulling, but waiting, like breath before a word. The tide hasn't risen in 2 days. I'm writing more frequently, not because I believe someone will find this, but because I need evidence of myself, of the parts that are still me, still human. If I am changing, and I suspect I am, I need to remember that it didn't start with claws or shells or posture. It started with silence, and then with shape. I see it now in everything. The way the ceiling tiles align in overlapping panels, the spiral of rust forming on the water pipes, the position of my own fingers at rest. Everything is settling. Everything is arranging itself. We are all moving sideways, moving. This morning, the sea didn't move, not recede, not rise. It just held. I stepped out at dawn, notebook in hand, and found the surf suspended. No ebb, no pull, just a slick line of stillness across the horizon, as if the ocean had entered a state of breathless attention. The sky was overcast, featureless, a uniform gray like the surface of a mollusk shell. The wind didn't come off the cliffs anymore. It circled, low and wide, like it was brushing against something massive just beneath us. At 11:41 a.m., the lab lost power again. The generators restarted as they always do, but the cameras didn't come back online. Their feeds were active, but every channel was static. Audio only. The audio was worse. A slow, patterned series of clicks. 4 clicks, then 2, then a pause. 4, 2, pause. I recorded it, played it back at different speeds. It never changed. No speech, no code, just rhythm. Ancient, final. I played it in reverse. It still made sense. I'm typing this on auxiliary power now. The interface lags. My fingers move slower, but more deliberately. There's a quiet in my bones that I can't explain. Not peace, not fatigue. Something deeper. Something settled. My reflection no longer matches my memory. The skin under my eyes has darkened, not from sleeplessness. I've stopped needing sleep. Or maybe I've simply stopped noticing the difference between waking and dreaming. There's a curve forming in my spine. I measure it each morning. It's slight, predictable, consistent with the formation I mapped in the skate embryo. I keep telling myself that it's psychosomatic, that I've been sitting too long at the desk, that posture can be corrected. But it doesn't want correcting. It wants to complete the arc. I submitted one last report last night. Not to the Institute, but to a backup server from my doctoral years. A redundant mirror site that might still ping satellite net before the uplink finally dies. The file name was simple: harbinger.log. I didn't include conclusions, just raw data, patterns, images, and a final message. It's not coming. It's already here, and we're already becoming. If someone finds this station, they'll find my notes, maybe my footage, if it hasn't corrupted. They'll see the arrangement of the bones outside, the sediment patterns, the stillness of the sea. They'll wonder if I went mad. I hope they do. Madness would be a mercy. A neat, containable answer. A failure of a single mind, not the quiet success of a planet resetting itself. Not the ecosystem reaching into itself to press the same ancient mold against all it still contains. I've stopped asking why it's always the crab. I understand now. It's not evolution's joke. It's not some efficient final form. It's the brace. It's the armor nature wears when the fire comes again. We think of evolution as moving forward, but nature isn't a line. It's a spiral, and it always comes back to this. The tide has begun to recede. The wind has stopped circling. It's time. If this is found, if this is read, ask yourself, has anything felt different lately? The aches in your joints, the curling of your hands when you type, the strange calm in a crowded place. Maybe you haven't noticed yet. Maybe the change has already begun. We won't go out screaming. We'll go out scuttling.